thank all our volunteers and members. We actually start planning December 17th in January. So a lot of what we do is having to track all the deaths, suicides, overdose, create memorial lists, event planning. There's really a lot of work that goes into this. But really quickly, I want to talk a little bit about, some people don't know that we consider sex workers anyone that even earns their living off erotic labor. So there's two different sectors. There's illegal sex workers, which are online escorts or a form of prostitution. And then there's legal sex workers like strippers and cam workers and fetish models and phone sex operators. So this year, and all are affected by stigma, violence, and bad laws, and online censorship, discrimination in housing, employment, child custody, and by banking institutes. This year, they passed FOSTA, which was Fight Online Sex Trafficking. They basically said anyone that publishes an escort ad, prostitution ad, that causes trafficking, and you're going to go to federal prison for a million years and be sued. And what we saw happen is all the website platforms that we spent years advertising on and building community to provide support for sex workers in crisis just disappeared. And it's really, really horrible. Within weeks of signing it, President Trump quietly defunded legal services for sex trafficking victims. So while they always talk about victims and the children, notice that they never talk about lack of jobs that pay a living wage or affordable housing or access to a higher education without debt. It's always the pimp and the victim, and there's no one in between. And they'll also call people who are organizing for sex worker rights the pimp lobby. And I can promise you that Coyote does not teach anyone how to be a sex worker. We tell people it's illegal, it is dangerous, you might not want to do this, but if you're already doing it, we want you to be safe and we want you to be able to be a part of your community. So I'm going to tell you about some of the things that Coyote does. We do regular monthly street outreach. We provide condoms, hygiene kits, Narcon kits, clean needle exchange, fentanyl test strips. And the way we do it is we set up in an empty parking lot and let the public approach us. And we don't care if you're a sex worker, if you're homeless, if you're just poor. If we have something, we want you to have it, and we think it's much more respectful than chasing street-based workers down the street when we don't have the resources to house them, or long-term residential treatment centers, or things that just don't exist. Now, meanwhile, the local organizations who are on the trafficking task force that are getting all the funding for trafficking have locked local sex workers out of services, out of community. They've refused any free training from us. They don't care how they treat them. And meanwhile, we have no paid staff and we have no office. We were really grateful that DERA allowed us to use their space for this evening. But the very power dynamic is basically letting police threaten a sex worker during arrest that you're going to be published in the newspaper and everyone at school is going to know. But if you'll just say you're a victim and work with this NGO, because we want to convict your third-party support staff, your driver, your booker, your friend, whoever you work with. And we find out right now migrant sex workers are at the most risk. And I think it was 2015, they raided a bunch of spas and they told everyone it was trafficking, and all those women were deported. What we found out is they were groups of women in their 40s or 50s that knew they were going to do sex work, that traveled here to earn a living. And of course, the government spins that a much different way. Other things that we do is, because we had some terrific interns, when we tried to do outreach to spas, we realized that we were scaring them. They would see white people and say, oh no, New York. So we quit doing it because we realized we don't have the right to scare people just because we're interested. So this year we had interns that were able to transcribe our Know Your Rights card into Chinese and Korean, and when they went to the spas they had much better luck, and the spa workers started asking them questions. Coyote is also part of the Amore Network, which is 6 local organizations that we hold family preparedness training, so if you're picked up by ICE and you want your child to go live with your cousin, that they will be able to go to school and get medical attention, provide housing for people at risk of deportation. They also monitor police violence through Cop Watch CDP, and they recognize state-sponsored violence and that violence towards sex workers is a hate crime. Other things that we do is we do research in public education. I think I've traveled to about a dozen universities this year alone. The research we did is a lot of people want to compare things about sex workers. They were all sexually abused as children. Like, how many Walmart workers were abused? How many of them were on drugs? So we know there was very little data on our population. In 2014 to 2016, we surveyed 63 Rhode Island sex workers, and 77% of them said that they would not report violence due to fear of arrest, being threatened with arrest, outing a coworker, or they don't believe the police will do anything. In 2017, we ran a 145-question survey on over 1,500 sex workers. And we're still analyzing the data to write a report. Julia wrote her thesis on the HIV and sexual health part. Some of the key findings we found is sex workers have better condom use than the general public per the CDC's data. They get tested regularly. I didn't know, but 45% of Americans have never been tested at all. So when I hear people wanting us to register and be regulated, I was like, well, who's going to stand over you to make sure you're using that condom? And it's another thing that's biased. Other things that we do is impact litigation, lobby for legislation. We also do jail support. Coyote right now writes to over 50 incarcerated sex workers, and we provide case management service, which include helping them come up with a reentry plan and access reentry services for the people that don't have anywhere to go. Our interns were a great help, and we were able to send out 300 Christmas cards to incarcerated sex workers this year instead of 50. Come on in. You can come on in. Hi, come on in, have a seat. Have some pizza, have a seat.
Oh, awesome.
So, blah, blah, blah. We also provide a lot of support service to sex workers in crisis. We develop safety trainings and online resources. And I'll give you an example of that, is everyone was hysterical when FOSTA happened and Backpage went down and CityVibe went down. And the first thing we did was create an online tool source of places they could post advertisements. And we took a risk because we don't know if we're going to be deemed. The government seems to think if you hand out condoms, you're promoting prostitution, but when we do outreach to drug users, no one's saying that we're promoting drug use. There's also laws that say that we can't access harm reduction funding because we might organize and feel empowered, which is kind of ironic. So the government is not interested in the public health and safety. In cities like New York and San Francisco, you can be arrested for carrying more than 2 or 3 condoms, which I think we can all agree does not promote public health and safety. So, okay, we already went. I want to talk real quick so I don't forget that we do have 2 calls of actions that we're supporting. And one of them you've probably seen in the media, Antonia Brown. She was a 15-year-old girl of color. She was under the control of a 43-year-old violent pimp. She got into a car with a man she thought was going to hurt her. She shot him, and the prosecutor immediately said, she's just a hooker that's trying to rob a guy. And they refused to acknowledge that she was a domestic sex trafficking victim. State and federal law says, even if you're under your own control, if you're a minor, you're a domestic sex trafficking victim. And we have found that when you're not the right type of a victim, you're not white, this tends to happen here. So right now we're encouraging people to call the governor's office in Tennessee who's thinking about giving her clemency before she gets out. And what happened is she was sentenced to life with no parole. And Tennessee changed their law that said you can't sentence a minor to life. So the parole board says, well, you're going to serve 51 years. She's been in prison for 14 years. If they keep her that long, she will be 67 when she gets out. Another call to action that we have on our Facebook page, that I probably emailed a lot of you, is our letter condemning the arrest on the women at Foxy Lady Strip Club. And this is a really interesting story. So it seems a female employee was sexually assaulted, and rather than investigate that, they decided to do a vice sting and arrest 3 women and put their names in the media, citing it was a public health and safety issue. I don't know why they think the woman would be safer on the street. Since then, there was a meeting and the police said they were trying to save the women. Well, they're not going to pay their rent or feed their children. One woman was 25, one was 30, one was 32. So these weren't young women. And I want to remind people, before Rhode Island criminalized prostitution in 2009, it was legal to strip at age 16, which I think we can all agree is really not appropriate. Now, there's also the anti-prostitution lobby that are going city to city. In New Orleans, they passed a law that you couldn't strip till you were 21. The courts overruled it, but now the courts ruled, okay, we're going to make them 21. So what that means is now that you're 18 and can't be a stripper, you have to be a prostitute because there's no other way for you to make a legal living. And this is all under the guise of rescuing children. So there's a great youth report John Jay College did where they went to 6 cities and they studied 1,000 minors between 13 and 24. And over 90% of these youth said, we don't have pimps and market facilitators. We teach each other how to find clients and avoid the cops because the state's created so many barriers, we can't even access shelter. So that report was published in 2016 and the government has done nothing to create more foster homes that are LGBT friendly. In fact, in 2016, we discovered Rhode Island had 320 unlicensed foster homes. But the trafficking people don't tell you that. They want to tell you that the pimps wait down the road from the foster homes, and the young girls just want love. And these kids, a lot of them have been abused. I'm sure some of them are incorrigible, but I think rather than policing people and spending all the money, creating awareness about trafficking is asking the public to become vigilantes and snitch on sex workers. It is, we don't even snitch on pedophiles. I mean, so it's kind of crazy. But rather than those resources going to our youth to help keep youth out of the sex industry and provide safety, it's used as this crusade to stigmatize, and it is killing us. So, okay, what do we do now? Hold on, let me look at my list. Next up, hold on, we have, wrong list. So basically I want to tell you a little history about, let me pass these out too, I'm sorry. These are our programs. And actually International Data and Violence Against Sex Workers was formed in Seattle. It was actually formed after the Green River Killer. So I think he killed over 80 women, but he basically said, I knew I could kill as many prostitutes as I wanted because no one was going to care. He also targeted runaways, and he was actually sentenced on December 17th. So this is a way that we publicly honor our sex workers we've lost to violence. We renew our commitment to ongoing struggle for empowerment, visibility, and the rights for all sex workers. We also renew our commitment to solidarity. Most violence against sex workers is also violence against transgender women, against women of color, against people who use drugs, against people who are undocumented and people who are homeless. And we cannot end the marginalization and victimizations of sex workers without fighting multiple ways in which sex workers are organized.